It was a chilly autumn afternoon when John found himself walking home after a long day at work. The leaves crunched under his feet, and the air had that unmistakable crispness that signaled winter was on its way. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the sidewalk. As he turned a corner, something caught his eye, a small object lying on the ground near a trash can. He stopped and bent down to take a closer look. It was an old, worn-out iPhone. The screen was cracked and the case was scuffed, showing signs of long use and neglect. At first, John hesitated to pick it up. It didn't look like it was worth anything, and besides, who would want such a battered device? But then, a thought crossed his mind. What if someone had lost it? What if the owner was desperately searching for it? Returning the phone could make someone's day, he reasoned. With a slight shrug, he slipped the phone into his pocket and continued on his way home. Later that evening, after a quiet dinner alone, John found himself staring at the phone, which he had placed on the kitchen table. Curiosity gnawed at him. Who did it belong to? Why had it been left in such a state? He decided to power it on, half expecting it to be dead. To his surprise, the screen flickered to life. The background was a generic image of a dark forest. The branches of the trees twisted and gnarled, reaching out like skeletal fingers. It gave him an uneasy feeling, but he brushed it off. John navigated to the contacts list, hoping to find a number he could call to return the phone. Strangely, there was only one contact saved. No name, just a single number. His curiosity deepened. Why would someone have only one contact on their phone? It didn't make sense. But maybe this was the person who could help him find the owner. With a sense of determination, John dialed the number. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times, and then went to voicemail. There was no greeting, just silence on the other end. John hung up, feeling a bit disheartened. He had done what he could, he thought. Maybe the owner would call back. With that, he placed the phone on his bedside table and decided to call it a night. As John lay in bed, he couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled over him since finding the phone. There was something off about the whole situation, but he tried to push it to the back of his mind. Sleep eventually claimed him, but it was far from peaceful. At precisely 3 o'clock in the morning, John was jolted awake by the sound of the phone ringing. The shrill sound cut through the silence of the night like a knife, making his heart race. He groggily reached for the phone, wondering who could be calling at such an hour. The screen displayed the same number he had dialed earlier. Hesitant, but unable to ignore it, he answered the call. "Hello?" John's voice was hoarse, thick with sleep. There was a pause on the other end, long enough to make John wonder if the caller had hung up. But then a voice came through, low, guttural, more of a growl than a human voice.
"Hello, John."
John froze. Goosebumps prickled his skin as a chill ran down his spine. How did this person know his name? His mind raced, trying to make sense of it. Was this some kind of sick joke? He forced a nervous laugh. "How do you know my name?" John asked, trying to keep his voice steady. The voice on the other end didn't respond immediately. When it did, it was slow and deliberate, dripping with malice.
"Stay there. I'll be right there."
John's heart pounded in his chest. He sat up in bed, suddenly wide awake. "What? Who are you? Where are you?" he demanded, his voice rising in panic. But the call abruptly ended, leaving John in stunned silence. He stared at the phone, his mind racing. This had to be a prank, he thought. Someone was messing with him, but who would go to such lengths and why? He tried to calm himself down, telling himself that it was nothing, just some stupid joke, but the dread that had settled in his stomach refused to leave. Just as he was about to lie back down, there was a sharp knock on his front door. John stiffened, fear gripping him tightly. Who could be knocking at this hour? His thoughts immediately went to the voice on the phone. Was it possible that they were already here? Cautiously, John got out of bed and made his way to the door. The knocking had stopped, but the silence that followed was even more unsettling. He approached the door and peered through the peephole, his heart in his throat. but to his confusion, there was no one there. The porch light illuminated an empty doorstep. He hesitated, then slowly unlocked the door and opened it just a crack, peeking out. The street was deserted, the only sound the distant rustling of leaves in the wind. John closed the door and locked it, trying to steady his breathing. "It's just my imagination," he whispered to himself. "It's just a coincidence." He turned to head back to his room when he heard a soft chime from the old phone. His blood ran cold as he realized it was a text message. He picked up the phone, his hands trembling slightly. The message was short, but it sent a wave of terror through him. "I'm here." John stared at the screen, his mind struggling to comprehend what was happening. The room suddenly felt colder, the shadows longer and darker. He could feel the fear tightening its grip around his throat, making it hard to breathe. Whoever this was, they were playing some kind of twisted game with him. A sudden creaking sound echoed through the hallway, causing John to jump. It was coming from the direction of the front door. Heart pounding, he forced himself to move, inching down the corridor. When he reached the entrance, his breath caught in his throat. The front door was wide open. Panic surged through him. He had just locked it. He was sure of it. He quickly moved to close it again, his eyes darting around the empty street outside. But as he reached for the door, he heard it. A faint, raspy breathing, coming from directly behind him. John's entire body stiffened. The room seemed to close in on him, his fear so intense that he couldn't move. He wanted to scream, to run, but his feet were rooted to the spot. Slowly, ever so slowly, he began to turn his head. Before he could see who or what was behind him, long, icy fingers clamped down on his shoulders. The grip was impossibly strong, pulling him backward with a force that knocked the breath out of him. A scream tore from his throat as he was dragged away from the door, away from any hope of escape. The last thing John heard was the door slamming shut, sealing him in darkness. The next morning, the sun rose over Melville, casting a warm glow over the quiet town. But John Walters did not rise with it. His home was eerily silent, the bed undisturbed, the door securely locked. It wasn't until later that day, when his neighbors realized they hadn't seen him, that the alarm was raised. The police were called, but there were no signs of a struggle, no clues as to what had happened. The only thing they found was an old, worn-out iPhone lying on the kitchen table. It was completely dead, its battery drained and unable to be recharged. The mystery of John Walters' disappearance baffled the authorities, and despite a thorough investigation, no trace of him was ever found.